Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Kent City Council Committee of the Whole meeting. Today is Tuesday, June 23rd. This is Council President Tony Troutner, and welcome to anyone joining us today. This is a remote meeting due to the COVID-19 coronavirus emergency. So we are broadcasting live on Kent TV 21, Facebook, and our Kent TV YouTube channel. So welcome to everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. Kim, do we have everyone present today?
Everybody is present and accounted for.
All right, thank you. Are there any changes to the agenda from council or staff?
None from staff, Madam President.
All right, thank you. Then let's go ahead and get started with our department presentations. The first one we have is a resolution to adopt the King County Hazard Mitigation Plan and Kent Plan Annex. I'd like to welcome Kimberly.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Council President Troutner, members of the council, and Mayor Ralph. Thank you for your time this afternoon. I am here to request a resolution to adopt the City of Kent's Annex to the King County Regional Hazard Mitigation Plan. As a region, emergency management offices have been working together to update this region-wide plan. And just like in 2015, the City of Kent will be an annex to the King County Regional Hazard Mitigation Plan. We as a city have had a mitigation plan since 2004. This plan meets FEMA requirements from the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000. This will have us to remain eligible to apply for mitigation grant programs, and it also meets the requirements of the community rating system that establishes the city's flood insurance rating. Within this plan, we identify likely hazards to our area and some of the history behind them. And we've also identified a few mitigation projects to address those hazards that keep us in line with the planning requirements. With that, I will take any questions.
Great, thank you. Do we have any questions for Kimberly on this? All right, so if there's no questions or comments, any objections to moving this forward to the consent calendar? All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kimberly.
Thank you very much.
We will move on. I'm going to welcome Toby. He's going to talk about joint funding agreement with the USGS for water resource investigations. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. My name is Toby Hallock, Environmental Engineer 3 with Public Works Engineering. I'm here to discuss the U.S. Geological Survey joint funding agreement, as you mentioned. This agreement is similar to one that Mike McToot has brought before the council in October. And if you could go to the next slide, you'll see a number of these gauges are already included in the agreement. The two shown here are on Rock Creek near our Clark Springs watershed. And on the next slide, you can see the other excuse me, on the next slide, you can see the picture or the locations of the gauges in the Kent Valley. There are 4 in the Kent Valley, 2 on Mill Creek, 1 at Earthworks Park, and 1 near the mouth of Mill Creek, where it meets up with Springbrook Creek, and the other is at Springbrook Creek. The 4th gauge we have in the valley is on the Green River. This is the only gauge that we have on the Green River in Kent, and this agreement will supersede the existing agreement by installing 2 new gauges specifically on the Green River and bring the total number of gauges into Kent to 8. On the next slide, you can see an example of some of the data that these gauges provide. This is an example of the information shown from the 200th Street gauge. And in the picture, you can see the high river right at 200th Street by Three Friends Fishing Hole Park. All this information is available online through the USGS website. And you can see the high flows where it peaks on the charts. And that was during our February storms where we had very high flows in the Green River. These graphs help us plan and identify flood risk reduction needs throughout the valley and throughout the rest of the city. On the next slide, you can see the another area of high water. This is at the Milwaukee 2 levee near 259th Street. Water was within feet of cresting the road and coming close to A1 pallets and Skyway towing. And these gauges will help us learn how the flows in the Green River will impact other businesses and residents in Kent. The next slide shows the locations of the two new gauges. One will be located on the pedestrian bridge near Meeker Street. This is the bridge that takes golfers from one side of the Green River to the other. The other gauge will be located on the pedestrian bridge, which is just south of 277th Street on the big hill climb to get up to the East Hill. These gauges will help identify how additional flows into the river from the agricultural land in King County will impact the flows on the Green River. The final slide shows a picture again of the 200th Street gauge bridges, or the gauges on the bridge. These are going to be very similar looking to the new gauges that are going to be installed. There'll be a small cut, as they call the little housing unit, and some equipment mounted onto the bridge. We'll do what we can with USGS to make sure we try to reduce any sort of graffiti or any other unwanted activity at these gauges, and they have a history of working through problems like that, and so we will continue to work with them. With that, I'll take any questions if there are any.
Thank you. Any questions for Toby? Councilmember Thomas, yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, that worked good. Yes, can you go back to the slide on the 259 flooding? Yes. Now on this lower right-hand picture that I'm looking at with the white car, can you tell me approximately where or the upper one, I guess, where the new things are going to go, the gauges?
So one of the gauges will be upstream of this at 277th. So it'll be up and around the Horseshoe Bend. Okay. Yeah, this doesn't show a location of where the gauges will be located.
Okay.
Another one will be.
Yeah, the 277th one. Okay, on the corridor. Yeah, right. Okay, by the Wickstrom Bridge.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Toby? So just obviously there'll be an additional cost because this is more equipment, and that will continue to be charged to the stormwater utility. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, great.
And this year, because of the installation, it will cost more, but after this year, the cost will just be for operation and maintenance of the equipment that's out there.
Okay. Any other questions or comments for Toby? All right, so if there's no objections and everybody is okay with moving this on to the consent calendar. All right, thank you very much for that presentation.
Thank you.
Now I am going to turn to April, and we are going to have an information-only presentation on the 2020 transportation grant opportunities, which of course we always like to get grant money for projects. So welcome, April.
Good evening. So tonight I want to talk to you about the 2020 grant opportunities. Next slide, please. Federal grant programs fall under two agencies, the Puget Sound Regional Council, or PSRC, and the Washington State Department of Transportation, or WSDOT. Both are responsible for overseeing federal grant funds. PSRC has three categories of grant programs. All projects submitted to these grants must be on critical regional corridors that are within or serve designated PSRC regional growth centers or manufacturing and industrial centers. Another important criteria is the roadway must be on the federal functional classification system. Additionally, all the programs require a 13.5% minimal local match. The first PSRC grant program is a regional program in which projects from King, Pierce, Kitsap, and Snohomish County compete for funding. The second grant program is the King Countywide Grant Competitions. There are a total of 6 King County grant competitions, of which Kent is eligible to apply to 3. The first countywide competition is a larger jurisdiction program, which is for cities with a population of 15,000 or more. The second countywide grant competition is the preservation program. This competition is for preservation and maintenance projects only. The third countywide grant competition is the non-motorized grant competition. This competition focuses on bicycle and pedestrian facilities. The last grant program is the Transportation Alternatives Program, or TAP. This grant program also focuses on bicycle and pedestrian facilities. All PSRC grant competitions had applications due earlier this year, except for the Transportation Alternative Program. The second recipient of federal funds is WSDOT. The first grant program is the Highway Safety Improvement Program, or HSIP, which has 2 grant opportunities also due this year. The first grant is for spot location safety improvements at locations with a collision history. The second grant opportunity is for locations with identified risk factors for collisions. One important nuance of these 2 programs is the state chooses the projects to fund, not the city. The projects that could be funded are located in the Local Road Safety Plan. The Local Road Safety Plan is an engineering document completed by the city traffic engineer. Additionally, HSIP requires a 10% match for preliminary engineering and for right-of-way, and there's a 0% match for construction if it is authorized by April 30th of 2023. If the project is authorized after this date, there is a 10% local match for construction. The second WSDOT grant program is a Railway Highway Crossings Program. This program funds crossing improvements on public roadways. The last program, Safe Routes to School, is a hybrid program. There is a mix of state and federal funding. A winning application will be told which type of funding they are awarded. And the last one that I won't talk a whole lot about is direct federal grant programs. And this includes things like the infra and build grants, which are directly from the federal government, as well as stimulus funding if it comes down the line. Next slide, please. The City of Kent submitted 2 projects to the PSRC regional program. The projects were 76th Avenue South, North Segment, and South 218th Street, 98th Avenue South, from 94th Place South to South 216th Street. The same 2 projects were also submitted to the King County Larger Jurisdiction Program. Next slide, please. The City of Kent submitted 2 projects to the King County Preservation Program. The projects submitted were East Valley Highway from South 212th Street to South 196th Street, and South 212th Street from the Green River Bridge West to Aurelia Road. Next slide, please. The City of Kent submitted 2 projects to the King County Non-Motorized Program. The projects submitted were transit and non-motorized improvements at West Meeker Street and 64th Avenue South, and Meet Me on Meeker from Russell Road to 700 feet east of Russell Road. The Meet Me on Meeker east of Russell Road project was awarded contingency funding from the 2018 grant competition after the application was submitted, so that one has been funded. Awards are for all of these grant programs will be voted upon by the PSRC Transportation Policy Board and followed by the Executive Board in July of this year. Next slide, please. The Highway Safety Improvement Program, or HSIP, Spot Location Program, is reserved for only locations with a history of severe or fatal collisions. The map details the spot locations listed in the City of Kent Local Road Safety Plan. Next slide, please. The Highway Safety Improvement Program, Systemic Program, is reserved for locations with 1 or more risk factors. The map in this slide details the systemic locations listed in our Local Road Safety Plan. One note, both of these programs will find out whether we are awarded funding and which projects in this coming fall. Next slide, please. The City of Kent submitted 1 project to the Railway Highway Crossings Program, and this project was for pedestrian gates at Smith and BNSF Railroad. Next slide, please. The City of Kent is in the process of developing 2 applications for WSDOT's Safe Route to School program. The first project is for school zone flashers at 7 schools, and the second project will widen north and south legs of 94th Avenue South within 150 feet of the intersection to provide left turn pockets, add protected signal phasing with flashing yellow arrows, and complete sidewalk connections. This project will benefit East Hill Elementary as well as Mill Creek Middle Schools. Next slide, please. Now for state funding. 3 agencies distribute state grant funding. WSDOT is responsible for administering 3 programs: the Pedestrian and Bicyclist Program, the Regional Mobility Grant, or RMG, and the First Mile, Last Mile Grant. The Pedestrian Bicycle Program funds non-motorized projects with an emphasis on projects that address known safety issues. This program requires no local match, but projects are prioritized that do include a local match. The Regional Mobility Program typically focuses on transit service and access to transit, but the 2020 call for projects added Transportation Demand Management Strategies, or TDM. This program requires a 20% local match. The last program, the First Mile, Last Mile Grant, is a 1-year pilot for 2020 only. The program also does not require a local match. The Transportation Improvement Board, or TIB, is the next program. They have 2 programs, the Urban Arterials and the Urban Sidewalks. And the last agency is the Freight Mobility Strategic Investment Board, or FMCIB. FMCIB awards grants to projects on designated T1 and T2 freight routes, the heaviest freight routes across the state. Next slide, please. The City of Kent is currently developing 4 projects for pedestrian and bicyclist program. The first project is for pedestrian improvements on Russell Road from Meeker Street to 500 feet south of James Street. The second project is for rectangular rapid flash beacons, or RRFBs, at 5 locations. The third project is for a hawk signal at 104th Avenue Southeast, State Route 515, near Southeast 206th Street near the library. And the fourth project is for design-only funding from Meet Me on Meeker from 64th Avenue intersection to the Washington Avenue North intersection. Next slide, please. The City of Kent submitted 1 concept letter for the Regional Mobility Program in May. This program operates in a different way than a lot of the other programs. You have to submit a concept letter, followed by a couple months later with a full application. The proposed project will use TDM, or Transportation Demand Management Strategies, such as outreach, education, van pools, carpools, transit passes, and promoting active modes, combined with the construction of non-motorized projects to address barriers to accessing transit. Non-motorized projects could include things like sidewalk gaps, ADA curb ramps, enhanced pedestrian crossings at intersections, as well as mid-block pedestrian crossings. The project focuses on residents of high-density housing in U.S. Census tracts with a higher than regional average of minority, low-income, and English as a second language populations, as well as a very low opportunity index score as defined by PSRC. Staff will be working throughout the summer for the full application. Next slide, please. The city submitted 1 application to the First Mile, Last Mile Grant. The project focused on providing assistance with transportation options for small businesses in the designated PSRC Regional Growth Center and manufacturing and industrial centers in Kent. WSDOT announced 3 grant awards last week, and the City of Kent application was not awarded funding. Next slide, please. The Transportation Improvement Board, or TIB, Urban Arterials Program, is a statewide competition with $60 million in available funding. There are 4 band or categories for projects. The City of Kent is currently developing 2 projects for the safety band, 1 project for the growth and development band, and 1 project for the physical condition band. The first safety project is on Reith Road from Kent Des Moines Road to Pacific Highway. The project is for 2 compact roundabouts at Lake Fenwick Road and at South 253rd Street, 1 RFB at 25th Avenue South, and a road diet on the entire corridor. The second safety project is a road diet and intersection improvements on 4th Avenue North from West James Street to South 228th Street. The growth and development project is again for 64th and Meeker transit and pedestrian improvements. And the physical condition project is for East Valley Highway from South 212th Street to South 196th Street. Next slide, please. The Transportation Improvement Board, or TIB, Urban Sidewalk Program has been canceled indefinitely, unfortunately, but usually this is an annual grant program. This grant would typically have projects similar to the Russell Road Pedestrian Improvements Project detailed earlier. Next slide, please. Staff are currently working to identify projects for the Freight Mobility Strategic Investment Board, or FMSIB. This grant might be suspended in 2020, and we're not sure yet. If it is not suspended, the available funding will be decreased to approximately 5 to 10 million statewide. So we're waiting to see what happens with this before we invest too much more time. And that is all I have, and I am open for questions, and Chad and Rob are also on the phone in case you have a question for them.
Great, thank you, April. Any questions or comments for April on this?
I do.
Councilmember Thomas, go ahead.
Ooh, thank you. April, can you go back to your original organization chart? I believe it was about the third slide.
Was it the state or federal grant?
No, right there. That's great. So if you go down from WSDOT to the Railway Highway Crossings Program, does our quiet zone enter into this at all for grants?
So I'm going to defer to Rob Brown on this one. He's on the phone.
Thank you. Rob, are you there?
Am I here? Can you hear me now?
Yes, there we go.
Hello. Oh, very good. Thank you. Excellent question. Unfortunately, no. The quiet zone and the type of project it is does not fall into any of the grant categories.
Yeah.
Even though you just saw a bunch of those, and you know, this is grant season. There's a bunch of grant opportunities this year. Unfortunately, the quiet zone does not fall into any of those.
Yeah. Okay. So the city has to pay for that itself. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Larmer, question or comment?
I'm sorry, I was on mute. So I was trying to quickly see on some of the diagrams where we were showing the spot projects or the different, I noticed a couple, there was roundabouts, but I didn't, I was trying to identify, I know that there's been talk in past years about a roundabout east of the Y at that big intersection there on 116th and 240, is that 248th? Which gets so backed up in the mornings and evenings with commute traffic. So I was just trying to see if any of these were addressing that intersection.
So go back 4 slides. It's the spot location.
There you go.
There it is.
Yeah, because I think I saw a reference to some
So that compact roundabout is at 248th and 116th is listed as number 11.
Oh, okay. And so that's one we're pursuing, or we do have funding for that?
So the way, this is one of those different grants, and each of them have kind of a different idiosyncrasy that defines them. For this grant program, WSDOT is actually the agency, they get to choose the project. What the city of Kent does is our traffic engineer develops a local road safety program, a local road safety plan, I apologize. And that plan details all of the locations that make sense based on either collision history or based on different risk factors that are outlined based on data. So we're not sure if this is funded until October. We'll find out if any of these are funded and which ones in October.
Wonderful, thank you.
Any other question? Oh, Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the grants that were canceled, the grant opportunities that were canceled, the grant funding, was that canceled prior to COVID-19 or since then?
Since COVID. And only so far one has been canceled. And the last information I heard from FMSIB is that it might still be on, just a lot smaller than normal.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Kind of a follow-up question to what Councilmember Fincher had asked. So most of these grants that we are applying for now, the funding for those have been secured. So that wouldn't change because of COVID?
It would not change because of COVID. That is correct.
And then we would possibly see maybe opportunities down the future to maybe be less or not as many, or there's probably no way to predict that at this point, but.
There's not. The federal funding pools tend to be a little bit more stable since when the economy is down, infrastructure is a very popular area to infuse cash at the federal level, whether it's through a stimulus or there's an upcoming transportation bill that's being discussed. So those ones are pretty stable. The state ones are the ones that tend to be a little bit less stable.
Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments for April? All right, when will we hear back from you at some point to find out if we receive some of these grants that you talked about?
I will. I should have an announcement for some of them in July, and for the rest of them, right around TIB announces usually right after Thanksgiving or right before. And a lot of the other ones, HSIP is another example, we'll know in October. So we'll know a good deal of them by the end of the year.
Great, looking forward to hearing what things went our way. So thank you so much. Moving on in the presentations, I'd like to welcome Bill Ellis to give us an update on the small business grant development and worker wage reimbursements.
Hi, good afternoon, Mayor, Council President, Council members. I'm here to provide an update as mentioned. So with that, thanks, Kim. You've loaded up my PowerPoint. First slide here. So if you recall, a few weeks ago, Council authorized $1 million for small business granting and job trainings. In parallel to that conversation, I was already having some conceptual discussions with some of our partners and other cities and other jurisdictions about best use for those dollars. In the intervening weeks, we've made a lot of progress on scoping contracts for a couple of different vendors to deliver services. And I'm going to provide some information about that today. First, looking at the $1 million into two buckets, I would say $800,000 on the small business relief direct cash granting side, and then $200,000 for wage reimbursements and job safety retraining for workers in the Kent Industrial Valley is the approach that we have been taking. Since even I think the packet that went out Friday over the weekend, we received some more information from King County about additional CARES Act dollar pass-through to the city of Kent for the same purposes. For the longest time, we weren't quite sure what the reporting requirements, eligibility requirements would be, whether we could amass those funds into the same contracts or not. So I've been leaving them out of our conversations until as recently as this afternoon, I was verifying with both law and finance ways that we could put this together. So that explains the difference in dollar amounts on your screen. So we've been negotiating with Craft 3, which is a community development financial institution, or CDFI, nonprofit for third-party administration of small business grants. We've come to an understanding on a scope of work. We are reviewing terms and conditions, yesterday and today, and from the preceding weeks. It's been sort of an identified best practice when doing something like small business granting to work with the CDFI. And Craft 3 is the largest in the Pacific Northwest. They have a lot of experience working with underserved communities. They have actually, I had known that they had a work plan for later this year in fall to serve the communities of Kent and Auburn from King County's Communities of Opportunity on more of a technical assistance strategy front. So there was a lot of good reasons to reach out to them immediately and talk about this project. It also became apparent as I was talking to them that they were working with King County for King County's own unincorporated areas grant dispersal services. So after much conversation with neighboring cities who are all taking slightly different passes at this, we felt it most prudent for the city, and also I think best to our objectives, to align ourselves as much as possible with King County's small business grant program. And one of the ways that we could do that would be to sign on Craft 3 services, which could extend the capacity of the city to actually undertake the review of thousands of potential applications, score them, rank them, and get checks written or ACH dispersed to businesses. The second thing that we've been doing, and I've already talked about to council in the past, as an outgrowth of our Port of Seattle partnership program with the Aerospace Joint Apprenticeship Committee, we have already gone under contract for about $100,000, which is $65,000 from Port of Seattle and $32,500 cash match from the city of Kent. We're looking at an additional $200,000, so roughly $300,000 in total for a very similar project, which would be to serve approximately 100 workers in manufacturing, with priority given to either Kent residents or Kent located business. AJAC would use their existing relationships with community service organizations, with service providers, and as well as their business development relationships with over a couple dozen manufacturers in the Kent Valley, and try to identify recently laid off workers in aerospace, offer them COVID-19 safety trainings, which they are drawing up right now with Green River College, and would be able to launch this program July 1 using the existing funds from Port of Seattle. And they would also, in addition to those COVID-19 safety trainings on how to be safe in the workplace, try to induce rehiring of these workers and bring down the unemployment rate by subsidizing their wages, or on a reimbursement basis back to the employer, up to $2,200 per employee. We see this as kind of a strategic move for us also on sort of the marketing side, where we're advancing the Kent Valley brand. It's the first time that we're going to be able to attach the Kent Valley brand to an action in direct support, aside from the usual sponsorships. We're also leveraging and are communicating and coordinating with Impact Washington, which is the manufacturing extension partnership for the state of Washington. They are doing outreach to the same business pool of manufacturers, where they are providing at no cost, using federal dollars, assessments and procedures on how to make their workplaces more safe in the COVID-19 world. And, you know, in anticipation of a question that may not be asked, you know, what is the situation in hiring in manufacturing aerospace right now? And I think it's highly disparate. Some aerospace employers are having the worst year of their company's history. Other manufacturing firms are having their very best year ever. And I think it's notable, and Michelle Wilmot worked with the Aerospace Futures Alliance on a virtual aerospace job fair. They had over 1,300 registrants to meet employers, including Kent employers, including firms like Viken Metals or Blue Origin. Over 500 job seekers actively talked with recruiters. We're looking for a more in-depth report in the future. But to the idea of trying to speed through economic recovery, identifying dislocated workers who may have been laid off, and anything from baggage claims to concessions at SeaTac Airport, linking them up with a training agent like AJAC and getting them placed in a new job, and then sort of helping the employer recover faster by having that work somewhat subsidized using some of these CARES Act dollars, I think is a strategic move for the city of Kent, in addition to the business relief that we're doing. Next slide, please. So CARES Act funding. I mentioned already that Craft 3 is working with King County. There's a little screenshot there. I can come to this in greater detail after I presented. They've already announced on their webpage what kinds of businesses can apply. As you all know, the CARES Act funding, the city of Kent received $3.9 million, reimbursing local governments for their COVID-19 expenses. Another allowable use, and so far we've authorized $1 million, is for reimbursing businesses for COVID-19 expenses. Something that's been a piece of discussion between economic development managers and Department of Commerce, and now we've received a decision from Department of Commerce, is whether or not we needed to track receipts on any grants given, because it was a reimbursable grant to the business. That was not received very well, as you can imagine, trying to track back to April or May whether or not the latex glove a nail salon purchased was to protect someone as PPE or was a beautician expense, and then proving that by receipts was just a logistical nightmare. So Department of Commerce has reversed themselves on that and is going to function as a cash grant, even though the chain of reimbursement will remain the same. So essentially, we're working as a pass-through of federal dollars with those federal requirements from State Department of Commerce, who's provided some FAQs and some guidebooks as well, but also a lot of flexibility onto impacted businesses. the city is so far looking at modeling ourselves very, very closely on King County's announced eligibility criteria. One of the reasons being because the source is ultimately the same and the desire and the objectives are ultimately the same, there's very little reason to diverge from it. A lot of what King County is doing, and thus what we would be doing, is to be looking at those businesses that weren't able to get SBA or Small Business Administration support for a myriad of reasons. And so we're trying to model ourselves on that, reserve funds for those businesses that have experienced closures most harshly. So think of the food and restaurant business, the personal service business, whether that's a masseuse or a nail salon or a barber, and focus the funding onto those sort of more mom and pop businesses. We also want to ask those businesses to show that they've been in business for 3 years or up on their local taxes, have a business license, and that they haven't received other federal funding, grants, loans, or perhaps the Washington State Governor's Award funds. But we want to focus on those that are most impacted and missed out on other opportunities, because in the reading of the CARES Act funding, this is meant to be more of a reimbursement for the expenses that were occurred by being forced to be closed and deal with the COVID-19 situation. So we're trying to be good stewards of these dollars and work with a third-party administrator that, next slide please, has some experience recently. So Craft 3 usually as a CDFI specializes in making loans to small businesses and doing the underwriting. Some of the technical assistance, they have an interest in sort of keeping halal in some of their loan products. They have most recently in this sort of emergency period, of all the CDFIs I've talked to, they all immediately deferred to Craft 3 and said, well, you know, we don't do granting, but Craft 3 has recently and tried to crack this nut. And the two projects that they're most referencing are reflected in this sort of flow chart of activities, where you have in the orange there what Craft 3 did for JP Morgan and Chase is sort of a philanthropic funder of small business grants, about $1 million in our area recently, and what Craft 3 has proposed versus for Kent. You can compare that to what Craft 3 did for Prosper Portland. So I'm just going to walk through this flow chart left to right, talk about whose responsibility be what, and you can see at the very bottom there sort of the rough timeline, because we are working with Craft 3. We're going to be a few days behind King County by design, not by intention, but well, by attention if it's by design, but because we would like to make sure there's enough capacity to actually receive the grants, grant applications, sort them, process them, vet them, get it out, and then of course do the all-important follow-up. So from left to right, there's a lot of tasks here, of which I'm going to spare all the detail under each one of them, but most recently, we have been talking about designing the grant program and creating the application materials, and we're modeling ourselves closely on what's going to be received from King County. The next arrow there, going left to right, is outreach, and that's City of Kent's sole responsibility. There's really no way you would ever outsource sort of the local network and all the investing that not only economic development's done with community partners, but human services and the mayor's office with groups like Casey Diggs and others to do that outreach piece. So that's really our responsibility and not something Craft 3 would do. But then from the announcement through the application intake portal, which would be an online portal that Craft 3 would be using their proprietary software, the decision on the grant awards, the notification forms, the signing and dispersing of funds, and all the follow-up, that would be the work items primarily of Craft 3. So going now to the green bar left to right, we've been negotiating with Craft 3 for services and their fee for some of this work, which would be coming out of the CARES Act dollars. Our next step after we've agreed on terms and conditions would be to sign that contract. Following that, we would open up and announce the application form 1 week after King County's application is opened. Now, they've posted online some of their eligibility criteria. King County is not released. They're still working with Craft 3 on their evaluation and selection methodology. So we don't know exactly when that kickoff date is. We just have rough periodizations here, which is reflected in the timeline below. That's why there's no dates. King County hasn't indicated a date, but we would follow close on the heels of King County. And then on the next tax here, next directive that would come out of a contract. So Craft 3 would be sorting the hundreds of applications for compliance on eligibility, evaluating them, selecting them, sending them checks. Special consideration would be given for minority businesses, indigenous people, immigrants, the business owners from communities that have been shown to have unlikely to have received funding under the SBA. Technical assistance in filling out applications would come from the city's many community partners. And my next slide will actually deal with the outreach plan and the translation. So I'll go to that next slide, or ask please that we go to that next slide. I'm sure there might be questions about this flow chart, but we'll return to that. So Michelle Wilmot's working with me right now, and she's been taking lead in drafting a outreach plan. And we're breaking down the steps and identifying lead persons for all of those tasks that would go under the outreach bullet. There's the Green River College, of course, Small Business Development Center, but there's also the Kent Cultural Diversity Inclusion Group, the Cultural Communities Board, KDP, Kent Chamber of Commerce, A, to get the word out, but B, we want to make sure that there's partners, mentors, translators, others standing by to help people fill out the applications. Now, we're, of course, a very diverse community with many languages. One of the advantages, or one of the many reasons why we're considering to model ourselves on King County is we would like to benefit from a lot of the translation of materials King County is undertaking for many languages, so we do not have to replicate those. There's a lot of complicated attestations by the business to waive their, to say that they haven't received other federal funding, etc. We'd like anything that would, be waived under threat of perjury to be translated into another language. However, of course, there is some discrepancy between what King County thinks are the most prevalent languages and what are the most prevalent languages that we estimate to be in Kent. We don't have firm data on what language speakers are owning which businesses in the highest degree, but we do have some decent census estimation as to what are the most prevalent 10 languages in Kent. And what we're doing right now is we're calling around and trying to identify folks who would be on call, not only for the translation services, but have people who can speak in those languages to then help them fill out the application back into English, which is important because although CRAP 3 does work with a lot of different cultural communities on their loan front, they do not have the capacity, nor will they offer the service of translating, let's say, 1,500 applications from 30 different languages back into English so they can be consistently reviewed. They will all have to be reviewed in English, even if we are trying to translate into multiple languages. So we're trying to build on, work with the relationships that the city has invested in over years for this support, and we will also try to compensate community organizations to support us in this. I think it's really important, is this third bullet, to say having a more equitable outcome in this competitive grant process, because there will never be enough money to replicate, or I'm sorry, to replace all of the lost revenue for being forced closed for months. $1 million will not cover that, no matter how we stretch it. Or will it be able to cover enough businesses in a way that would get the dollars to be a significant amount? So not everyone will be able to receive these grant funds. But I think one thing that we can do, and is considered a best practice, is to lower the barriers to application as much as possible. So all the things I was just speaking to, translation, mentors from peers, drawn from cultural community groups, having them ready to help out, and that we really work hard on this outreach piece to make sure that the pool that we are, CRAP 3 is making decisions from, reflects as much as possible the community at large. Part of the reason to follow King County, I did speak this already, was to supplement languages that are more prevalent in Kent, specifically languages like Punjabi, Hindu, Urdu, and as well as Samoan and Ukrainian and Russian. We're also anticipating, no substitute, I already spoke to that. And we're anticipating the ability to make approximately 290 grants. It's somewhat dependent upon the conversations I was having just today about the additional $200,000 being added to the $800,000 for small business grants. We were thinking originally of $2,500 per business. If we receive this extra $200,000, it would probably be good, especially since these phases are going quite long, to think about maybe an additional $500 per grant applicant, successful grant applicant, to $3,000 each, and trying to increase the number of businesses to about roughly 300. We think that's roughly a third of all the types of businesses that would be most impacted that I tried to describe. But this is a guess because our data is incomplete, and our business license information really has always been sort of volunteered as to whether or not the business chose to fill out what kind of business they were. So it's a guess. It's an educated guess, but it's a guess. We're trying to help people We're trying to help them at a number that is significant enough that it feels helpful for the work of taking the application and the rest. And we're trying to cover a good portion of the number of businesses in Kent that were most impacted and could not receive federal or other kinds of funds. That was my last slide, unless I have a couple others if there are questions asked. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill. Councilmember Thomas has been waiting. Go ahead, Councilmember Thomas.
Thank you. Hey, Bill, I think I'm a little confused. I think it was on your third or fourth slide. You said that this is only available for unincorporated King County.
No, that's King County's grant program. I am modeling myself. We are modeling this grant for Kent on unincorporated King County. This is, of course, Kent funding for Kent businesses.
Good.
Kent pass-through dollars. Just the eligibility criteria and the selection criteria is being modeled on King County to truncate the amount of time spent, replicating application materials, translating materials, and also because there is really no defensible reason to the conclusions that King County reached as to how to funnel money to those most impacted or smallest business under the guidelines of the Treasury. It would be very much better or worse than what they're doing already.
That makes more sense. Thanks for the clarification.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you. Bill, I was wondering two questions. One is, as far as municipalities, is there anything more than the CARES Act that is able to help the cities with some of the costs and losses that they've incurred? And then I might have missed it, but as far as for the small businesses, is this going to be able to help them with costs aside from employee costs, like with just the cost of operating the business, like their rent or lease costs, their utility, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I can speak probably better to the second question, Councilmember Fincher. So yes, I think that was a really critical thing that just about a week and a half ago, Department of Commerce said no receipts. So the funding will be cash grant, and the businesses can use it for a wide array of things. That's different, of course, to the contract that I referenced with AJAC, which will be more around wage reimbursements, where that's a program basically trying to work on unemployment. But I think the small business grants for the mom and pops, which is the bulk of the dollars that we're talking about, the bulk of my presentation, the answer is yes. As to other federal funds for cities, I know there are congressional discussions sporadically with the White House around additional stimulus programs. I do not know of another funding source.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Boyce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bill, can you go back to your flow chart that talked about the process?
Sure. Well, Kim can help me with that.
Yeah. So I have a series of questions for you. So
sure.
I want to make a statement. Anything that King County put out for the process, I'm not a big advocate for it, but this could be something totally separate, right? So I haven't seen too many things that come out that have been really a best practice, but that's my own personal opinion. But so the application, the outreach process, so you say we as a city, we own that. So we're going to reach out to the business and let them know about the process. But from the announcement to the disbursement to the follow-up, so the city, what input does the city have into that process?
Sure. Specifically, I would say under Decide grant awards and before, imagine another point between application intake and Decide grant awards. We will see the evaluation criteria that King County is creating with CRAFT 3, and CRAFT 3 will be scoped to present us with that selection evaluation form, and we get to say sort of yes or no, we like that, or we change it.
Okay.
But the decision point, we would be pushing that into CRAFT 3 to review and do.
Okay, I'm okay. And then as far as the cost of CRAFT 3, have you negotiated what it's going to be, like a percentage of the $1 million? Or?
Sure. Great question. We're still sort of negotiating that, I would say, Councilmember Boyce, but their rates fee structure for grants that they just created, I don't know, the last 3 months, it ranges between 5 and 10%. And it depends on how much we would do in-house, right? If we had more staff capacity, which of course, it's not free, so staff time ultimately, but if we did, for instance, like King County is doing, where they are also in-house within King County signing and dispersing the funds and the checks, that's one less activity for CRAFT 3, one less thing that they would charge a fee for. They are a nonprofit. This is quite a bit of work. I would say that given the amount of work that we are proposing sort of back to craft 3 in this sort of iterative process here, at 8.7%, not so terrible. I've been calling around with a lot of other cities and other counties. I think the thing that I heard that rings the most true to me is when I talked to the Director of Human Services in Snohomish County about this. And I think for similar services out of Snohomish Workforce, a separate legal entity, they were looking at 15%. So they considered 10% a bargain. There's quite a bit of work that goes into reviewing this much paperwork, liability questions, et cetera. And so the outreach is solely on us. We are trying to, as much as possible, build off of King County. King County, of course, had already done some contracts with Craft 3 over the years, and most recently to work in Kent with Craft 3. So they may have gotten a little bit of a different price on that. I've tried to talk to King County about that as well. But, yeah,
then my last question, Bill, walk me through this here. So we got a lot of business in Kent, right?
Right.
So everybody's going to be applying. Example I would give you, let's say I'm really 1 month from shutting down, right? So you get $3,000, that really not going to help me versus if I'm another business, if you give me $6,000 and I'm doing good, that can help me get over the hump. So how will you distinguish a business that's barely holding on with the fingernail and that $3,000 is not going to help no matter what?
Excellent question. Excellent question. And something I've been talking with the neighboring economic development managers quite a bit about. I would say it's nobody's druthers to do grants. Everybody usually prefers loans for those reasons of sustainability and being able to then ask a higher sort of burden upon the business for doing the application, plus the amount of work that goes. But when it comes to actually verifying and collecting more sensitive information from the business to verify if they are a business that's going to succeed over the long run or not, that's a much higher bar. And sort of, again, trying to truncate a lot of conversation around it. I would say when it comes to just doing $3,000 grants, Craft 3 has, I think, and this is defensible, looked at the expenses in South King County and other places and said, yeah, that's a significant amount. I know that I had discussions early on, for instance, with Auburn. Auburn is trying to make sure every single business has closed gets a little something, and maybe they're at $1,200 for their grant program. Craft 3 would say bare minimum $2,500. Now, is this a perfect science versus an art? It's much more art, and it's not a perfect science. And to actually do the exhumation of the business's plan, review all their information, have them submit tax forms and try to figure out how viable they are, that would take a lot more work. Actually, Kim, though, can you please go to the last slide that I have beyond my thank you? I was anticipating this question potentially. So here's the eligibility for business grants. To get to some of your concerns, though, council member, we would like to see that the business has been at least in business for at least 3 years. So that's one way of indicating that they are a stable business. If it was a business that just opened 4 months ago, it's not really enough of a sample to say, yeah, this is that, and not, this is COVID-19 related versus this might be issues of them being a business in the first place. We're trying to, of course, let's see, if the business is temporarily closed due to COVID-19, this is my third from the bottom bullet, the business intends to reopen is allowable. But to do more than this, in terms of verifying the business's viability and making those sort of winner or loser decisions, it just vastly complicates it and sort of defeats the speed of trying to get there before someone's hanging on past the then close. So those are some of the concerns. I think if the U.S. Treasury guidelines had been something else other than what they were, especially early on, where Department of Commerce was asking for receipts, et cetera, and there was more freedom to look at this as similar to like an Economic Development Administration federal grant to a city to do an economic development program, we could be more discerning as to how we would help businesses. But given how it's written to be more of a reimbursement for costs experienced during COVID-19, I think the preponderance of cities and jurisdictions are using this as sort of quick cash stimulus and viewing it that way. Similar to, I think maybe the philosophy behind it is more similar to a helicopter drop of money, like every resident of the United States got with the federal dollar stimulus checks, $1,200 a person. it's probably more similar to that than it is a strategic project, which is one of the reasons why I think I advocated early on that we put some of the funding, if this Kimmy would go back to slide number 2 with AJAC and trying to work on that as well. So they were doing a little bit of both, something a little bit more strategic, and then also something that is a little bit more trying to compensate. And as I said earlier, I think I don't think there's enough. The printing press from the federal government can't print hot enough to make up for all the revenue lost per se. But this is something that where no one's feeling that this is fair, but this is maybe as close as we can be to be objective in terms of passing through the dollars.
And my last statement. So, Bill, are you gonna, as we go through this year, will the city be keeping track of this year? So from day one, say maybe 2 years down the road, they need to kind of look back to see how successful this program was. And then my last comment is just for you. Just thank you for your leadership. You're a jewel for us in the city to have, and really appreciate your hard work. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Council Member. I would just say, into your question, yeah, I think one of the reasons why we wanted to work with Craft 3 is I knew that this is sort of potentially a beginning of a longer partnership, potentially, where they would be already sort of, it was in their work plan to come work in Kent anyways, pre-COVID. So this is maybe an opportunity to introduce them to our community. And then on the flow chart, which Kim, you could please put back slide number 4 with the flow chart there. I think you have up right now sorry. Very last bullet is actually an important one, follow-up. So that's a task that is often overlooked. It's not just the messaging, it's kind of, it's keeping a list of every business who got funding, but also all those who didn't get fundings, and making sure that they get linked out to the technical assistance that they could receive from, well, there's different quarters in which, and I won't list all the entities that want to serve Kent businesses, but besides the SBDCs. So I think that's a really key one. In terms of program success, I have to be honest with you, we've probably not given that as much conversation at this stage as we could, but it's a great question. And I think a lot of what we've been trying to figure out is just in terms of also protecting the city. This is sort of not a lot of precedent for this. The Attorney General kicked open the door on April 6th, saying that you could even do what previously would have been considered a public gifting of funds to private enterprise. So there's not a heck of a lot of precedent that cities and jurisdictions could pull upon in Washington State and say this is the legal best practice in which to give small business granting. So it's in the last couple of months we're trying to build this from scratch and trying to look for benefit from all the other examples that are out there. And I would say that one benefit from coming a few days beyond King County is we'll hopefully draw lessons learned about what's going right or what's going wrong. One of the benefits, again, of working with Craft 3 and their just recent granting experiences, there's a lot of very highly technical things that you don't think of off the bat. Like if a hair salon has the same ownership, but in 2 different taxing entities with a nail salon, do they get to apply twice or once? Things that they hadn't considered maybe from Portland's application case. And, we get the benefit from their experiences there, how we answer that question.
The reason why I asked about the cases, you see rises in the cases. I'm hoping and praying we don't have to repeat this year, but kind of make me a little nervous. So that's why I was asking. We may have to repeat this again. It'd be a good lesson learned. So, but thanks again, sir.
Thank you.
Great questions, Councilmember Boyce. Thank you so much. Councilmember Core, you had your hand up, but I'm wondering if your questions were answered.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, my questions have been answered. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Thomas, you have your hand up. Do you have any additional questions or comments?
No, sorry.
All right. Any other questions or comments for Bill? All right. Thank you so much. Great presentation and very useful information.
Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
We are going to move on. The next thing on the agenda is payment of bills, which we will move that to the consent calendar. So now we come to another information only item, utility customer support program, and I'm going to welcome Molly Bartlemay to talk about that.
Good evening, Council President Troutner, members of City Council, and Mayor Ralph. My name is Molly Bartlemay. I'm the Customer Service Manager in the Finance Department. Tonight, I'm going to be going over the Utility Customer Support Program and just to give a little information about what's currently going on in water utilities during this time of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have 3 items on the agenda, starting with Governor Proclamation 20-23, how the city is addressing that proclamation, and then the Utility Customer Support Program that we're coming up with that's really ultimately going to be our plan going forward. Starting with Governor Proclamation 20-23, this original proclamation came out March 23rd. Since that time, there's been some revisions and extensions. As this proclamation relates to utilities in the following ways. It prohibits disconnecting residential water customers due to non-payment. It ensures customers that have previously been turned off for non-payment can have their water service restored. It suspends all late fees and reconnection fees. The latest version of the proclamation also mandates that cities create a utility support program no later than July 10th, 2020. And this current proclamation is set to expire July 29th, 2020. So how has the city addressed the proclamation? We've suspended shutoffs. So the last time the city of Kent did shutoffs was in February. In March, if we would have done shutoffs, we would have shut off people that were delinquent on their January bill. So what that means is that currently we have customers that owe back to January. We also discontinued assessing late fees on all utility bills. The last time that we did assess late fees was the beginning of March. We've replaced our shutoff notice with what we refer to as an urgent notice. And this urgent notice was created to remind customers of their delinquent balance and really start to make a connection with our customers that are past due. Other things on this urgent notice was really making it clear to our customers that we want to work with them, but the city is unable to waive any of our utility fees. By sending out these urgent notices, it was really a chance for us to connect with our customers and sort of set up short-term payment arrangements. I would look at it as more of a way for us to connect with our customers and encourage payment, even not payment in full, but to start making that connection and talk about their options as we go forward. We've also closely monitored our delinquent utility accounts, just to kind of put in perspective where we are right now with our water accounts. If we go back to 2019, we averaged about 100 turnoffs a month. If we would have practiced our normal turnoff procedure last month, we would have shut off 423 accounts. So we're really looking right now is that we have about 4 times our usual delinquent customer amount. We'll have our numbers for June at the end of this week, and I'm kind of expecting a similar to trend as what we saw in May. We've also collaborated with some of our surrounding cities, and what we've really found is we're all kind of in a similar situation. I think it's going to be important to work with our surrounding cities to see their plans and really see if there's ways for us to work together. We also want to explore any options we have for customer assistance. We know that a lot of our customers are really past due and it's going to be hard to be brought current. So we want to make sure that we're exploring all those options and making sure that we have that information available to share with our customers. So what is the Utility Support Program? This is based off guidance attached to the most recent version of the proclamation. The original guidance has been pulled for some alterations. We expect when it's finalized, it's going to kind of have these same 5 points. Even if there's some changes, we think that these 5 points are important to consider. So we really can't finalize our program till we get that final information. But again, we kind of expect it to be similar to what their original guidance was. The first thing is disconnection of service. I think what's most important when we look at our program is our goal should be to keep as many customers' utilities turned on as possible. One idea that we've come up with as far as this is extending our turnoff timing. This week in June would normally be the week that we do water turnoffs. And those turnoffs would have been people that are delinquent on their April bill. And really what we would look at is maybe extending the timing on that and going back to say March. So instead of turning off customers that are delinquent with their past 2 bills, making it 3 and just doing that for a time period. And I think what that's going to help with is those customers that aren't necessarily really far delinquent, but are just needing that little extra bit of time. Next is reconnection of service. Unfortunately, no matter how much we reach out and try to connect with our customers, we know that we're going to get to a point where we do have to shut off service. Right now, we have a very firm policy that once you're turned off, we do require payment in full to get restored. We know that a lot of our customers are going to have a really far past due balance and a really high total balance. So we want to look for ways that when we do have customers in that situation, alternative ways to get them turned on. Maybe a possible example of this would be a one-time option where they could pay half of their bill and get restored, or maybe pay, you know, so much, say everything but the prior 3 months. But we definitely want to give them an alternate to make sure that we are not expecting full payment, because we know how high that's going to be. The next is payment arrangements, and this is going to be a challenge. We're going to have people in all different types of situations, as far as all kinds of different delinquent balances going back, you know, some back to January, some not as far back. But the other thing is we're going to continue to bill our current charges. So our challenge is going to be to how to set up a payment arrangement where we're not letting customers get further behind. So one possible option would be to make a requirement where customers need to pay their current charges plus 10% of their delinquent balance. What that would do is kind of slowly chip away at their past due balance, but not let them get further behind. Another option might be to say that they need to pay a minimum of 20% of their utility bill every month for the rest of the year, and then maybe going in 2020, increasing that to 30%. I think it's important, no matter what we do, that we have a very clear end date of when this program ends, but also make sure that it's very clear to the customers of what their expectation is and what they need to do to keep their service on. We've also suspended fees and charges. We need to make sure that we're very cautious about when we add those fees back. I think a lot of that timing is going to be related to what we do in these other instances. Public notification is going to be key. If we have this program, we want to make sure that our customers are aware of it and they know how to sign up and know that it's available. We'll certainly add this information to our website, along with sending out mailers, payment arrangement applications, so we can get as many customers tied into this program as possible. At this point, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions for Molly? All right, I don't see any hands raised, so thank you so much for that helpful information. All right, looking at the agenda, we have no other presentations left. So I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening.
Chair?
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Just a quick question. On the presentation, typically I ask Kim to send me a copy of it. If there's somewhere out on the server like the presentation I personally like to get my hand on, or should I just continue asking Kim to send them to me, or is a server we can have access to look at some of the presentation afterwards?
Drive of all of these presentations.
Okay, and they're all on the S drive?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam President, as well.
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Kim. Any other comments or questions? All right, everyone go stay safe and have a good evening. We are adjourned.
Thank you.